All right. Hello, everybody. We're at Pesahim, Daf Samech Tet. This entire daf is going to be an explication of the dialogue between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva that was mentioned in the Mishnah. I think we should go back to the Mishnah and review it because each step of the argument has to be fresh in our minds so that we can appreciate everything that the Talmud is going to explain about it. The Talmud is going to focus on three parts of the discussion. One, the Kal Vachomer from Yom Tov. Second, comparison about activities before and after you do shechita. Why is one allowed and one not allowed? And then Rabbi Eliezer's view regarding the sprinkling on Shabbat. What actually is his view, and that'll be the major part of the discussion. So let's return to the Mishnah, in which we saw that according to Tanakama, any of the preparatory activities that could have been done before Shabbat, you cannot do on Shabbat. You can do shechita because shechita you couldn't have done before Shabbat, and anything after, like the haktarat chalabim, also you can do on Shabbat. However, Rabbi Eliezer says anything that is required for the preparation of the Pesach can be done on Shabbat itself, including bringing it from outside the Techum. Okay, that's Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Now let's see the dialogue. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, b'halo din hu, ma'im shechita shemishum melacha dochat Shabbat, elu shemishum shivut lo yitchu Shabbat. So he says shechita is a asur misum midoraita, and it overrides Shabbat. So other things that are only asur misum shivut, it's a lower prohibition. So for sure you should be able to do those on Shabbat. Rabbi Yoshua counters that look at Yom Tov as a comparison, because on Yom Tov you're allowed to do shechita if you want to eat a meal. And yet you cannot bring the korban from outside. You cannot do a shivut. So just because you can do a melacha d'oraita doesn't mean that you are allowed to do a melacha of shivut and violate Yom Tov. So too on Shabbat. So Rabbi Yoshua is going to reject Rabbi Eliezer based on this Kal Vachomer. But Rabbi Eliezer counters, wait a second, that's not the same. You can't compare the shoot and mitzvah. Regarding Yom Tov, that's only optional if you want to eat a meal or if you don't want to eat a meal. And so that's why you cannot violate the shivut beforehand and bring the animal in. But on Pesach of Shabbat, there it's a mitzvah. So there's more of a reason to violate Shabbat. We mentioned yesterday that according to Rabbi Yoshua, it actually is a mitzvah to eat a meal on Yom Tov. So for Rabbi Yoshua, he wouldn't say that there's any difference between this. We're going to see the Bali is going to explain how you can reject Rabbi Eliezer, even if you assume that Yom Tov is a reshut, having a festive meal on Yom Tov. Still, we can reject it. Okay, Rabbi Akiva came back. Now, Rabbi Yoshua kind of is quiet. His argument ends, but Rabbi Akiva comes and tag teams to respond, and he says, how about haza'ah, right? Sprinkling the paraduma on someone who's tameh in order so that they become tahor, and then at nightfall they'd be able to eat the korban pesach. That's a mitzvah, and yet you can't do that. You cannot do that on Shabbat. That's the 14th of Nisan. So afal titma'al elu. So don't be surprised at these other things, the preparations for korban pesach on Shabbat, that you cannot do them, right? So we don't allow any this other shivut like haza'ah. That's also a shivut. We don't do it, even though you need it in order to be eligible for korban pesach. So Rabbi Eliezer says, "Aleh nidan." Oh, you know what? I would argue with that with you on that point as well, right? Just like shechita is melacha and is doche Shabbat, haza'ah, which is only a shivut, all the more so you can do it on Shabbat. I actually argue on that very halacha. I think both are allowed. Good. So now taking this Kal Vachomer, Rabbi Akiva says something that's kind of bold, because it's clear Rabbi Akiva doesn't think that this is true himself. He's just saying an argument ad absurdum. He says, if you're going to really make that Kal Vachomer, you can do it the other way around. Achiluf. Just like haza'ah, which is only a shivut and does not override Shabbat, it's prohibited. So if I apply your Kal Vachomer, I can come to an absurd conclusion that shechita is melacha, and therefore you cannot do shechita on Shabbat. That was the opinion of Bnei Betera, who didn't want to do it, and of the Dead Sea sect. So this is like really out there to challenge Rabbi Eliezer's kal vachomer logic by showing it can be reversed and come to something absurd. And Rabbi Eliezer says, Rabbi Akiva, that's absurd. It goes against the Torah itself that says b'mo'ado. So, right, forget about it. I'm not going to accept the way your argument that the other way around. I'm going to say that both are permitted, shechita and haza'ah. And therefore, any other shivut also I can do on Shabbat. Anything that's for a mitzvah, I can do on Shabbat, even though I could have done it before. Rabbi Akiva responds to that. Wait, for Korban Pesach, we have an explicit word, moed. For the others, you don't have an explicit word. And so we conclude with Rabbi Akiva, who has a general rule that says anything you could have done before, you may not do on Shabbat. But shechita, which you cannot have done before, has to be done on the 14th in the afternoon. And if that's Shabbat, then that overrides Shabbat. All right, that was all the Mishnah. And now the Gemara will go into it each step at a time. Okay, we begin the Gemara here. Oh, sorry, I'm not in the right place. Here. Amar Rav Asher. Ulmai deka amar Rabbi Eliezer nameh Yom Tov reshut itle pircha. Rabbi Yoshua himself thinks that eating a festive meal and doing shechita on Yom Tov is a mitzvah. And so that's why he says it would be a good comparison. Just like you cannot do the preparation on for shechita on Yom Tov, you cannot do the preparation, bring the animal there on for Pesach either. But now the point is, even according to the Eliezer, who says that you're eating a festive meal on Yom Tov is reshut, and so if the animal's not nearby, you don't have to bring it. I could still apply a kal vachomer to prove that it's not the same, to prove that it's equivalent, and you cannot do preparations for Yom Tov or for Pesach on Shabbat, as follows. Uma Yom Tov she'etir bo melacha shel reshut, lo yetir shivut she'ima on Yom Tov, which is obviously much more lenient because you're allowed to do shechita even for not a mitzvah, just because you feel like eating a meal, according to the Eliezer, who says you don't have to eat a festive meal. And yet you're allowed to violate Yom Tov. And so Yom Tov is easy to violate, it's more lenient. And yet you cannot do the preparation on Yom Tov. So Shabbat, shelo etir ba'ela melacha shel mitzvah, Shabbat, which is more stringent, because on Shabbat, you're only allowed to violate Shabbat for korban, that is a mitzvah that you have to bring. And odin shelo tatir shivut ima, and therefore, all the more so that you may not, since Shabbat is more stringent, all the more so you would not be able to violate Shabbat for only a shivut. If you can't do a shivut on Yom Tov, which is more lenient, certainly you can't do it on Shabbat, which is more strict. So that's a way that even according to the Eliezer's refutation, Rabbi Yoshua could have proved this kal vachomer. Okay, but how about Rabbi Eliezer? How would he respond to that? He could say, Shivut mitzvah adif le. He could say, nevertheless, on Shabbat, we're doing preparation for a mitzvah. So that is more needed than on Yom Tov, in which you don't have to actually have a meal. So there is, in fact, more reason to permit it on Shabbat, even though Shabbat is in general more stringent. Okay, so we leave that as is. And now we go to the next part, which in the outline as comparing before and after slaughter. This is very interesting. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Umali im dachu machshirei mitzvah. This is a Beraita. The Beraita is bringing in more arguments that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva said to each other. The Mishnah, it's evident that the Mishnah is quoting only part of them. Kind of a sampling, but there's more arguments that went back and forth. So Rabbi Eliezer here has an argument why it should be allowed to do the preparatory actions. Malim dachu machshirei mitzvah shelachar shechitat Shabbat ditaved lemitzvah lo yitchu machshirei mitzvah shelifnei shechita et Shabbat. Rabbi Eliezer says you agree that, for example, you can burn the fats of the animal on Shabbat. So if things that are side points to the mitzvah, and after you do shechita, you're allowed to do them on Shabbat, right? Because they're part of the mitzvah. So if you can do things afterwards that are part of the mitzvah, then so too you should be allowed to do the preparatory mitzvot before shechita. What's the difference between after and before? Okay, it's really quite a challenge. Yesterday we said that you can burn the fast to show how beloved a mitzvah is in its time. Yeah, but you didn't really have to do it on Shabbat. You could have burned the fast after Shabbat. So, to be Akiva, you should apply the same thing. Something that you could do before Shabbat or after Shabbat, you shouldn't be able to do it on Shabbat. So what's the difference between before and after? Amar lo Rabbi Akiva, demali im dachu machshirei mitzvah shelachar shechitat Shabbat, sharei dachta shechitat Shabbat. He says, why? What reason do I have to reject this comparison? I have a good reason. Once you do shechita, then you violated Shabbat to do shechita. From that point on, since I already began the process and I already did the shechita, so now Shabbat is overridden. Once Shabbat is overridden, I could do all the other things I need to do. But that's not the same as before shechita. The things I did before, I didn't do shechita yet. In other words, for him, shechita is the main thing that must be done on the 14th for sure. Once you do shechita and Shabbat is overridden, then I can follow through with whatever else I would normally do with the korban to make it a valid sacrifice. But the things beforehand, shechita didn't come and break Shabbat yet. Since Shabbat is not yet broken, I cannot do that. Kind of like as an analogy, if someone has to violate Shabbat for a sick person, right? So once you're doing that, and you have to drive someone to the hospital, right? Or you're going to say, don't use the brake so that you don't use more gas, right? And just go through, drive dangerously. You wouldn't say that. Once you're driving, you can drive and use gas, whatever you need. Once you violated, then you're going to act in a normal way. But before you're allowed to do that, you can't, preempt before you actually had permission to violate Shabbat. Okay, that's one answer. Rabbi Akiva gives. A second answer. Another reason is, what if you do shechita and then it turns out that this animal was tarif, problem with the animal, and so now you did all that preparation. Retroactively, you'll find that you violated Shabbat, right, for no reason, because it's not actually a korban Pesach. That's different from after. Once I do shechita and see it's a kosher shechita, then all the things I do after, I know for sure are permitted to follow through with the mitzvah. The things done before are still in doubt. They're still in abeyance, and they may turn out to not be allowed. Therefore, don't do anything beforehand. Okay, good. So those are the two answers. Rabbi Eliezer could have a good answer to the response to the second one. If you're afraid that the shechita, the animal, won't be kosher, so then say, don't do shechita at all. Because everyone agrees you're allowed to do shechita if it's going to be a valid korban Pesach. But if it turns out to be an invalid korban, now you did shechita for no reason. So according to your logic, don't do any shechita at all. So that logic really doesn't make sense. Ela ha'amar leberesha ufrache v'adar amar lehachdemah li imdachu. Okay, since Rabbi Eliezer has a good argument against the second one, you know what? We should switch the order of these two. It must be that not davar ached is not yet another matter, like two different answers that are both good, but he must have said the second one first. And then Rabbi Eliezer rejected it. And then he said, okay, fine, I agree with you, but I have another answer. And then he gave the first answer. And the first answer would stand. All right, very good. So that is the part B of our outline. And now we're going to get to the longer discussion, which is this line about the sprinkling on Shabbat, in which Rabbi Akiva said to Rabbi Eliezer, hey, according to your Kal Vachomer, I could argue the other way around. And just like sprinkling is not allowed on Shabbat, so too you can't even bring Korban Pesach on Shabbat at all, right? By Kal Vachomer. If you can't do sprinkling, that's only Shavut, then certainly you cannot do Shechita, which is the Oraita. Okay. Now, this a fascinating Gemara here. Tanya, Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer, Akiva, Bishchita heshabtani, Bishchita tehem mitato. Unbelievable. He says, Akiva, are you challenging me based on an argument regarding the slaughter of the animal? And you're giving me this ad absurdum argument that according to you, Rabbi Eliezer, even slaughter wouldn't be allowed? Because you challenged me with such an insolent argument, your death will be through shechita, right? You're going to die an untimely death. Okay, that's a kind of unimaginable. Turns out to come true, right? Rabbi Akiva is killed by the Romans as a martyr, right? But so quite amazing that Rabbi Eliezer takes such offense to Rabbi Akiva's strong question, right? Strong question. But I mean, this is always a danger in studying with a great sage like Rabbi Eliezer. On the one hand, you want to be able to ask a question, but if you go a little too far and ask it in a way that is insulting, disrespectful, then you better watch out. Okay, so quite an astonishing statement there. Amar lo Rabbi, al tachpireni bishat hadin, kach mekubelani mimecha, hazaa shivuti ve'ena dochat Shabbat. So Rabbi Akiva responds and says, Rabbi, Rabbi Eliezer, do not contradict me when we're discussing this kal vachomer, because I have a tradition from you that you are, that hazaa is a shivut, but it does not, even though hazaa is only a shivut, it does not override Shabbat. You're the one that taught me yourself that you may not do hazaa on Shabbat. So you see, it looks like Rabbi Eliezer must have changed his mind or forgot what he said, because originally Rabbi Akiva heard Rabbi Eliezer teach that you do not do hazaa on Shabbat. And now all of a sudden, now Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer says, why not? Yeah, you could do hazaa on Shabbat. And then he learns the kal vachomer from, right, that you can do hazaa and you could do the shechita. And so Rabbi Akiva was simply responding based on something that he knew Rabbi Eliezer taught before that was different. Because Rabbi Eliezer says you're not allowed to do hazaa on Shabbat. And then he said, so therefore, according to your logic, you should not be able to do shechita either. Okay, so that's all the baraita. Rabbi Akiva seems to have a good answer. So we wonder about the baraita. If we can trust that Rabbi Akiva heard it from Rabbi Eliezer, so since Rabbi Eliezer once taught that you may not do the sprinkling on Shabbat, why did he change his mind in our Mishnah and now say that you may do sprinkling on Shabbat? We're going to have two answers to this. One is Ula and one's Rabbah. Amar Ula, Rabbi Eliezer ki agmere hazaa de Terumah agmere. The Terumah gufa la dachya Shabbat. Says actually Rabbi Akiva misunderstood, misheard, misquoted. Rabbi Eliezer originally simply said that if someone wants to get the sprinkling of the peraduma on Shabbat so that he can eat terumah, no good. You can't override Shabbat in order to become pure so that you can eat terumah, because you don't have to eat terumah on Shabbat. You can wait till Sunday. And so there's no need to override Shabbat in order to eat terumah. That's what Rabbi Eliezer said when he mentioned that hazaa does not override Shabbat. But regarding Pesach, no, Pesach is a mitzvah. You have to do it that day. In that case, it would override. And so maybe Rabbi Akiva misheard. Okay. So that would explain he didn't actually change his mind. It was a different case. Now the Gemara points out, Rabbi Akiva name ki otbe hazaa de terumah otbe. In fact, maybe Rabbi Akiva did not mishear. Rabbi Akiva himself was challenging Rabbi Eliezer from a case of hazaa all year round, regarding like with terumah. Shehi mitzvah vehi mishum shivut. It is a mitzvah to eat terumah, and doing sprinkling is only a shivut. And so that's his point. Here's something that is only a shivut. It would be a mitzvah to do it, although it doesn't have to be that day. And yet, you, Rabbi Eliezer, say it does not override Shabbat, so to any other shivut. That, in fact, was his question. But Rabbi Eliezer misunderstood Rabbi Akiva's intention, and he thought that Rabbi Akiva was trying to challenge him regarding Pesach, the Pesach motiv le, and that's why he felt that it was so insolent that now you're taking something that I never said, right, and applying something I said to something I didn't say regarding Pesach, and now you're making this false kal vachomer, right? And so that's why he got so annoyed at Rabbi Akiva. All right, but maybe it was just a simple misunderstanding of what case we were talking about. Fine, that's Ula's explanation of Rabbi Eliezer. He did in fact change his mind. There was a miscommunication about which case they were talking about regarding hazaa for terumah or hazaa in order to be able to eat korban Pesach. Okay, now we get the second explanation. Metiv Rabbah. Rabbah has a problem with Ula. Heshib Rabbi Akiva v'amar hazaa temeh met tochiach. We have a baraita, right? And in this baraita, it explains further what Rabbi Akiva said. And here he says, the haza'ah of tamemet will prove shachal shivi shelo liot b'Shabbat u'be'erev shapesach shemitzvah v'hi mishum shivut v'nadochat haShabbat. Regarding someone who was tamemet, and the seventh day when of his purification process is on Shabbat, which is also at Pesach, and in that case it was be a mitzvah, so that he can eat korban Pesach, and it's only a problem of shivut to do the sprinkling in the first place, and yet you do not violate Shabbat. Everyone, you agree, right, that you would not violate Shabbat. So it's clear over here that Rabbi Akiva meant, in fact, the sprinkling for korban Pesach and not the sprinkling for Terumah. So since we have a Braita specifically against Ula's interpretation, so we have to reject that interpretation, and instead Rabbah is going to offer another one. In fact, when Rabbi Akiva learned from Rabbi Eliezer had in fact said that doing haza'ah for korban Pesach is prohibited, that you don't override Shabbat. So in fact, if in fact Rabbi Eliezer had taught that to Rabbi Akiva, how come now Rabbi Eliezer is denying and saying that you can override Shabbat to do haza'ah? Rabbi Eliezer must have forgotten his original teaching. And Rabbi Akiva simply wants to remind Rabbi Eliezer that he had taught originally that haza'ah for korban Pesach does not override Shabbat. So why does he say that explicitly? Why doesn't he say, excuse me, Rabbi Eliezer, you're contradicting yourself, right? 20 years ago, you told me it's not allowed. Rabbi Akiva said, it's not nice to contradict my master. I want to say it to him in an indirect way. How can I say in an indirect way? By presenting a kal vachomer with that assumption. So he says, hey, there's a kal vachomer. Let's assume that that haza'ah is prohibited, and it's only a shivut. Then you would come to a conclusion that, with your kal vachomer, that even shechita is also not allowed, because that would be the oraita. And he was hoping that Rabbi Eliezer would recognize, oh, that's a ridiculous kal vachomer. Let me go back to the presumption. Oh yeah, I remember. Actually, haza'ah is prohibited. And so that was Rabbi Akiva's hope in presenting it that way. He was actually trying to be respectful, but it didn't come across that way. And it seemed to Rabbi Eliezer that Rabbi Akiva was being disrespectful in presenting this absurd argument. Okay, anyway, that would explain not that he changed his mind, but rather he had forgotten what he originally, Rabbi Eliezer had forgotten what he originally taught. Okay, good. Now that we got to that, let's try to explain the halacha itself. Haza'ah ma'tama ladachia Shabbat. Why, for what reason can we not sprinkle on Shabbat? Like, what's the problem? You're just taking some water, sprinkling it on someone. Like, what is it? Right? I'm just moving it around. I'm moving the liquid. I'm taking it and sprinkling it on the person. So, Tidche Shabbat mishum Pesach, right? So Shabbat should be overridden, because that way I can do korban Pesach. What's the problem? Amar Rabbah, the same sage that gave that answer, says it's actually a gezerah. It really would be allowed, but the rabbis are afraid that, let's say, where's that paraduma water? Oh, it's in someone's house outside the wall. Okay, now you're going to go and carry it. And carry it so that you can sprinkle it in the Bet HaMikdash. And that wouldn't be allowed. Now you're violating carrying. That's the oraita. So that's why the rabbi made a gezerah. Don't do any sprinkling on Shabbat. Okay, fine. Rabbah actually is one that says this regarding other mitzvot as well. Like, how come you can't do lulav on Shabbat or read Megillah? Right? We say the same thing. You might have forgotten it outside, and you're going to carry it for Amot. Okay, I don't know if Rabbah said in every application, or maybe he said it in one of them, and we apply it to the others as well. And that would explain in general why the problem of haza'ah. But it doesn't explain it for Rabbi Eliezer. According to Rabbi Eliezer, so what? Even if it was in a different house outside the walls and the Shut HaRabim, and you'd have to go and carry it, so what? He says that any preparation for a mitzvah that has to be done on Shabbat, you can violate even a deoraita. For example, circumcision on Shabbat, right? even if you didn't bring the knife from before Shabbat, you're allowed to go and carry the knife through the Shut HaRabim and to the baby in order to perform Berit Milah. So Rabbi Eliezer wouldn't have a problem with that. There's no reason for him to make that gezerah. So why, in fact, I mean, we're accepting now what Rabbah said, that Rabbi Eliezer's original opinion, his actual teaching is that's prohibited to do hazah. We're wondering why. Amreh, hanemi lehecha de gabra gufa chazeh, veramech yuba aleh. Aval hacha de gabra gufa la chazeh, la ramech yuba aleh. He's giving a fundamental distinction that we're going to discuss further. He says, when are you allowed to violate Shabbat, even a doraita, as a preparation for a mitzvah? That's when the person who needs to perform the mitzvah is under the obligation to do it. For example, a baby who needs a Berit Milah on the 8th day. So you got to go get the only problem is we don't have the knife around, so go and get it. But in this case, this person is tameh, right? And that's why he cannot do Korban Pesach. So what do you want to do? You want to go and sprinkle him so he could become tahor. But right now in this state, he has a legitimate excuse, right? He doesn't have to bring Korban Pesach. He's patur from Korban Pesach because he's tameh. The Torah said, anyone who's tameh on the 14th of Nisan, let him wait till a month later. So he has a get out of jail free, he had to get out of Pesach free. So therefore, since he's not obligated to do it, we don't have to violate Shabbat to bring him into the category of being obligated, right? Because in fact, you cannot violate Shabbat for that reason, right? There is nobody here. There's a person who's tameh lamet. He's not obligated, so I can't violate Shabbat to make him obligated. Okay, it's different from the baby who is obligated to get a Berit Milah, and therefore I have to violate Shabbat in order to be able to do that. Okay, that's a really fundamental answer. Now we're gonna question how this applies and when this applies. First, a consequence of this. Amar Rabbah, לדברי רבי אליעזר, קטן בריא מחמין לא חמין לברותו ומולו בשבת, דן חזילה. קטן חולה, אין מחמין לא חמין לברותו ומולו, תהה לה חזילה. This is according to this distinction that we just said here. If you have a baby who is healthy, yet in order to make sure that he will stay healthy, even though you're doing the Berit Milah, he needs to be bathed in warm water. Now, you should warm the water from before Shabbat, keep it warm, and then use it on Shabbat. Let's say you didn't warm it up before Shabbat. Are you allowed to warm it up, violate Shabbat, and warm it up on Shabbat? So if it's a healthy child who is obligated to get the Brit Milah, then yes, you are allowed to do that to make sure that he will remain healthy. But if it's a sick child, meaning he's so sick that he cannot get a Brit Milah, right, in his current state, we cannot warm water for him to make him healthy so that we can do Berit Milah for the same reason. While he's sick, he's not obligated to Berit Milah. So we cannot violate Shabbat because there's nobody here that's obligated to do Berit Milah. We can't violate Shabbat in order to make him obligated. Only if it's a healthy child who is obligated to do Berit Milah, we can violate Shabbat so that we can go through with the procedure. Okay, so that's Rabbah, is interesting. However, Rabbah is the third generation. He's the teacher of Rava with an aleph. So the student disagrees. Hold on, if he's healthy, though, why does he need the warm water? So what's the point? Really, all babies are considered sick regarding Milah. Whether he's sick now or he's going to be sick if you do the Brit Milah, it's the same thing. If you know for sure that the child will get sick by doing Brit Milah, then you can't do it. Then he's patur also. Echad katan bari ve'echad katan chole en mechamin lo chamin lahabroto mulo Shabbat teha lachazi. Rather, if you did warm up the water before Shabbat, then go ahead and use it. That's the normal case. If you didn't warm up water from before Shabbat, then no matter what state the baby's in, whether he's currently healthy or currently sick, we cannot violate Shabbat and warm the water for him because either baby is not fit for the mitzvah. They are both sick or potentially will get sick if you do it, and therefore they are both piturim from doing Berit Milah, and you can't violate Shabbat in order to bring someone into the category of having to be obligated. Okay, so that's why Rabbah rejects Rabbah. All right, that was one question. Now, another student of Rabbah, which is Abaye, is going to ask a further complex question against this categorization. And this is from an Arel. Arel, someone who's not circumcised, we're talking about an adult who just never got circumcision for whatever reason, is not allowed to bring Korban Pesach, right? Arel shelomal anush karet. So an adult who can get circumcision and doesn't, and then he neglects Korban Pesach, right? He can't do Korban Pesach properly, gets a punishment of karet. Dibrei Rabbi Eliezer. That's Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Now the question is why, right? Isn't the Arel out of the category? And yet here is a person who is unfit. He's not in the category of someone who can bring Korban Pesach. And so we can't do Berit Milah on the 14th to violate, right, Shabbat. Let's say for 14th of Shabbat, he wouldn't be able to violate it. And so he should be not in the category at all, and therefore not Arush Karet. The fact that we say he does get Karet means that the obligation is incumbent upon him. So that's the question, right? So this is an exception to the general rule that we said before, that someone who is not obligated or would not be chayav and would not be able to violate Shabbat. This person is chayav. Okay, to answer this, Amar Rabbah, Kasava Rabbi Eliezer en shohatin vezorkin al temeh sheres vekol sheilu beyachid nidche besibur abdi betumah vechol milata deita basibur ita beyachid. So Rabbah is constructing this elaborate answer that depends on a couple of assumptions. One is that we have to assume that according to the Eliezer, someone who's tameh sheretz, he can go to mikveh, wait till night, and he'd be pure. Let's say he wants to offer Korban Pesach through a shaliach. So I'm not going to touch it because I can't, but I'll send it with someone else. You go and do it, and then by nighttime I'll be kosher, and then I can eat it. No, you don't do that. You cannot do shechita or zirika for someone who is tameh sheretz, because at this current state he's tameh and therefore not under the obligation. Okay, let's assume that Rabbi Eliezer says that, and furthermore, let's assume that anything that's for an individual would cannot do, so too, and as a community, they cannot. That would be pushed off. So too for a community would be pushed off, and anything that can be done with the community, also an individual can do. Okay, what do we mean by this? It's much easier to explain with the examples that it brings. Arelut ti'ikule sibur arelim ninhu. Let's say the whole community are uncircumcised. How could this happen? It did happen, right? In the generation of Yetziat Mitzrayim, and the second generation of Yehoshua, right? When it kind of came time for Pesach, they were all arelim because they didn't get circumcised in the desert. So what was the law? They didn't say, okay, where you can all do it. Since the majority is uncircumcised, you can all do it. No, they said everybody has to go now and get circumcision immediately, and then you could do Korban Pesach. So you see that you cannot, when a sibur is uncircumcised, they all nevertheless have to do circumcision. So Yachid Nami Amrinahu Kum Mehol Ve'abed Pischa. So too, if it's individual, one person that is Arel, he would have to do Berit Milah himself in order to be able to do Korban Pesach. And if he doesn't get Berit Milah and he makes a Korban Pesach, he would get karet. Okay, so that would be the case where the communal obligation is the same as the individual obligation, and they have to. Tuma dikulai sibura temeninhu lama dinan alaihu ela abdei betuma yachidna mepatur. And the opposite is, let's say, impurity. Let's say the whole community is impure, or most of them. And in that case, we don't say you have to go and sprinkle them to make them impure. No, we say since most people are impure, we can perform the Korban Pesach even in a state of impurity. In such a case, then el abdei betuma yachidna mepatur. In such a case, an individual who is tameh does not have to bring the Korban Pesach, right? He would wait till the next, and therefore sprinkling does not override Shabbat, right? Because he's patur. He's not in the category of someone who has to bring korban pesach. Okay, so with this distinction, you see now he is able to answer that question. The difference between arel and tameh is that in arel, just like when everyone is arel, he cannot do it. So to an individual arel cannot do it. He's not in the category at all. He's within the category. He has to do it, right? He has to get Berit Milah and do it. So the obligation of Korban Pesach does apply to an arel, whereas it does not apply to someone who's tameh. Just like it would not apply to a sibur who's tameh, because they can do Korban Pesach. Okay, so that's his first argument. Now we're going to ask a couple of questions on this equivalence of individual and community. I have an example of something that applies to that does not apply to a community, that does apply to an individual, which is Pesach Sheni. If one person is far away or is tameh, then they get to do it. They could do a makeup on Pesach Sheni, but the whole community never gets pushed off to Pesach Sheni. So that your rule doesn't work. He says, no, you can't. That's not a good comparison. When the whole community is tameh, then they actually do the first one. So why would they have to do Pesach Sheni? They did Pesach Rishon because they're all tameh. So therefore, that's not a good comparison. That doesn't break my rule. Okay, second one is more difficult. Metibe yachol lo yeh anush karet ela shayat tahor. So Torah says that who can do Pesach Sheni? Someone who was tameh or they were far away. So what if they weren't? What if they were tahor and they didn't do Korban Pesach? That person gets karet. What if they were close by and they had no excuse and they don't do Korban Pesach? They get karet. So I know those two are not good excuses. What about the rest? How do I know that these also are not good excuses and you would get karet? For example, arel. So arel who doesn't do it, he can't say, I have an excuse. I didn't have Berit Milah. I couldn't do it. No, you got to go do Berit Milah and become tameh. And also tameh sheretz. Ushar kol hatemein minayin. Here's going to be the problem. This tameh sheretz is not a good excuse, even though it's talking about tum'ah. And other tamein, they can't say, well, we couldn't do it. Rather, they say, right, they get tameh. We know that from the word ha'ish. That's going to include all these other people also. So that's the braita. We're going to analyze it. Since we're looking for cases that would be karet, and it goes and finds this case of tameh sheretz. Therefore, it must be that you may not do shechita for tamunus tameh sheretz. So then why would he include it? If he could have actually brought it anyway. Hainu tahor. It's the same as being tahor. So you wouldn't have to include it as a separate category. Rather, it seems that this person cannot do Korban Pesach, and yet he is chayav, which means we should actually violate Shabbat to sprinkle him so that he can do it. And even though a sibur that's all tameh, that would not apply because they could just do it. Yet an individual is not exempt, as we said before, but has to do it. So this is a challenge to that equivalence principle that he said before, and therefore that cannot be the answer to the difference between arel and tameh. Ela marava kasava Rabbi Eliezer shochatin v'zorkin al tameh sheretz. Rather, Rava is going to reject one of the presumptions before and say that someone who's tameh sheretz, in fact, he can send someone, do shechita and do zirika for me, even though I'm tameh right now. And that's okay. Also, tameh met can send someone to do it for him. Haza'ah lemai la'achila. Now, why would he also need to get sprinkled? Only to eat it. Achilat Pesachim la me'akva. But you don't have to eat the Korban Pesach in order for it to fulfill your obligation. As long as someone eats some part of it that's within the group, even if you don't eat it, it's okay. And that's the reason why someone who's tameh, any kind of tum'ah, does not get sprinkled because actually he can fulfill his mitzvah of Korban Pesach while being tameh by sending it with someone else. And that could explain the distinction according to Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, Amar le Rava bar Ada bar Abad Rava im ken misapes al nishchat shelo leochlav. Hold on, if you can do Korban Pesach and do shechita for people who are tameh and can't eat it, right? We just said that in the Mishnah way before, right? Just said that you cannot sacrifice the Korban for people who may not eat it. They have to be eligible to eat it. And these people are tameh, not eligible. Amar le shelo leochlav v'cholo zaken la de la chazev al hai. No, Shelo Lachlav was talking about people who are sick or old and they physically cannot eat a kezayit. But these people, potentially, they can eat. They physically can eat. They're just tameh. So they have to fix that. But otherwise, they would be allowed to eat it. So therefore, even to do Korban Pesach for someone who is tameh would still be a valid Korban. All right, that's a very interesting opinion. And lastly, we're going to just explain the last part of the klal at the end of the Mishnah. Klal amar Rabbi Akiva. He said anything that you can do before Shabbat, you can violate anything that you could have done before Shabbat. You have to do before Shabbat. You cannot violate Shabbat to do it on Shabbat, like bringing in carrying the Korban Pesach. Amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav halacha ke Rabbi Akiva. That's how we follow the halacha. Udnan name gabe Milah ki hagavna klal amar Rabbi Akiva kol halacha she'efshar lasot erev Shabbat ena dochat Shabbat. Milah she'efshar lasot erev Shabbat dochat Shabbat. Okay, we said this regarding Berit Milah as well, where Rabbi Akiva says the same principle. I mean, it's equivalent that regarding Berit Milah, anything you could have done before Shabbat, like preparing the knife, bringing it, making sure everything's there, you cannot do on Shabbat. But Berit Milah itself has to be on the 8th day, so that does violate Shabbat. And over there, Amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav halacha ke Rabbi Akiva. Rav Yehuda, in the name of Rav, also said halacha Rabbi Akiva there. So this seems redundant. Why do you have to say that we follow halacha here and there? They're both the same principle. So we answer, Usricha diash minan gabe Pesach, hatem du machshirei mitzvah lo dachu Shabbat, mishum zelu nichatu aleh shelosh esrei beritot. I might say that Korban Pesach, where it's not so significant. It doesn't say that there's 13 covenants regarding Korban Pesach. So I would say, okay, yeah, over there you can violate Shabbat. Over there you cannot violate Shabbat. Aval Milah din lichirtu aleh shelosh esrei beritot ema lidchi. But regarding Berit Milah, where it says in the paragraph regarding Berit Milah, it says the word Berit 13 times in Genesis 17. Which is a significant number. So you see that the whole basis of the Berit is dependent on Berit Milah. So I might say Berit Milah is more important, and that's why it violates Shabbat. Interestingly, Shabbat is the other thing that is in fact called the Ot Berit. So I might say that it applies only to Berit Milah, but Pesach is not as important and wouldn't. That's why he had to say that halacha is like Rabbi Akiva, even regarding Pesach. Or even regarding Berit Milah, that I might think that it does violate, that even the preparations violate for Berit Milah because it's so important. No, that's what I have to say regarding Pesach, regarding Berit Milah, that no, you cannot violate Shabbat even for the preparations. And the other way around, Milah, Shabbat, and the other way around, I might think that the preparations for Berit Milah don't violate Shabbat because if you neglect to do Berit Milah, there's no karet. But Pesach, if you don't do Pesach and you can, then you get karet. So I might think that Pesach is more important than you can violate Shabbat for machshirei mitzvah of Pesach, and that's why I have to say regarding Pesach that it also doesn't. One last point, it's really strange that it says that there's no karet for Berit Milah. In fact, if someone doesn't do Berit Milah, they do get karet. So why does it say that you don't? Seems the reason is because it's not clear when the time limit is. Even if a person, let's say their father doesn't give them Berit Milah when they're young, when they're an adult, they have to do it. Okay, when do they have to do it? As soon as possible. Okay, so they don't do it when they're 20 and they do it when they're 30. They don't get karet as long as they do it at some point. So since it's not clear, there's no clear end date by which you have to do it, So the karet does not really apply until, I guess, the end of their life. Where Pesach, if you don't do it by the end of the 14th, then you violate it. So the karet actually does apply with a given with a given time limit. And that concludes the explanation of that Mishnah. Tomorrow we'll continue with the next Mishnah. Baruch Adonai L'olam. Amen.